We've already seen how functions can take parameters on their command lines. Well, it's actually possible for a shell script to also take command line parameters, just like any other Unix program. So the fact is that any Unix command can receive parameters via the command line. It's just a matter of whether that program actually makes use of the parameters. Now, we can make use of them if we choose to via the variables $1 through $9, and we use them exactly the same way as we use them inside a function. So theoretically there's very little new for us to learn here. We just have to see a few examples of this in use. Also, it's worth mentioning that $* and $# or $pound if you like may be used exactly the same way as well as they are used with functions, just like $1 and $9. So that essentially completes the set. Anything you could do with a function you can actually do with the shell script. So let's have a look at some examples of that. Here is a very simple script called PARM-test, which is short for parameter test, which just goes through $1, $2 and $3 and does a little if test to see if the parameter was set, and if it was, then we echo out a little message to say what it was set to, and if it wasn't, we just say that it was not set. So let's try running this program all by itself, just without any parameters first, and we find that the 3 parameters were not set. Now I'll run it again, and this time I'll provide a parameter of AAAA for the first one and BBBB for the second one. And I find, of course, that parameters 1 and 2 were set, but number 3 was not. The interesting thing about all of this is that we're just using $1, $2 and $3. We can pass any information into the script on the command line. We can pass in a file name or a sentence. A sentence can be one parameter. Let me show you an example of that. So this, and the trick is, of course, to put it inside double quotes or single quotes if you like. This is the first parameter, and then, I don't know, anything else for the second one. Now, I've got a little error message here. I was hoping I'd get this. This is actually coming from the test program. As you can see, there's a little square bracket in there where it says too many arguments. It's very easy to fix that. The problem is that I neglected to put the double quotes around that. And I've obviously got to do the same thing here. This is just one of those cases where it's vitally important that you remember to always put your double quotes around any reference to a variable when using it with the test program. So let's try that again. Well, it'd probably help if I actually saved the file. And again. And parameter number 1 is, this is the first parameter. Notice that the quotes that are in there, the double quotes that you can see after the words parameter number 1 is, those quotes were put in manually by me. They are not the quotes from the actual command line. Those quotes are removed by the shell. I'll prove that for you if you like. I'll just remove the quotes from around the $1 here, and again, and run it again, and as you can see, you actually do not get the quotes from the command line as part of your parameter. Let's have a look at another example now of how we might access our command line parameters. Here is a simple shell script that uses a for loop to loop through each of the parameters on the command line and do a couple of actions there. And all we're really going to be doing is put out a little echo message saying parameter number 1 is, and then obviously the first parameter. The next line is just a little way that we can keep track of how many we're up to. So let's run that, and we'll try the old AAA BBB, and that works quite nicely. The reason I wrote this particular example is I wanted to show you what would happen if you ran a particular program like this and fed it a very large number of parameters. like /bin/star. There's all the files in the /bin directory. Now there's probably going to be quite a few of them. Let's see how many. Well, there were actually, the shell expanded that command line so that there were in fact 86 parameters on the command line. And we have, as you can see, listed all of them. So it is possible to have a large number of parameters on the command line, and furthermore it's actually possible to reference each one of them. There's obviously no such thing as $86, but there is a $8, and there's a $7 and a $9 and so forth. There's also a $*. But of course it's actually very easy for you just to go for and use a for loop to essentially loop through each parameter on the command line. And finally, I've created a little shell script here to illustrate that there is in fact a difference between the $1 and $2 inside a function and the $1 and $2 of the shell script themselves. So I've created a little function called do nothing, and all it does is it echoes out its parameters. And then, well, that's really all the shell script does as well. So what I'll do is I'll call this shell script and I'll pass it two command line parameters, AAAA and BBBB. And when it runs, it's going to call the do nothing function and pass it XXX and YYY. We'll have a look at what the output looks like for that. Now the function's parameters are XXX and YYY, whereas the shell script's parameters are AAA and BBB. But both echo lines are actually referring to $1 and $2. So clearly we have a different $1 inside the function and a different $1 outside the function. So it's a very good idea not to get those confused. Probably the simplest or safest thing to do is at the beginning of your program or at the beginning of your function, copy $1 and $2 and any other variables from the command line that you're using away into other variables. Give them actual names like file name equals $1 and username equals $2 and so on. That has the benefit of actually making your shell script more readable as well.